Emma had not planned to stay long in the bookstore that afternoon, yet the quiet warmth of the place pulled her in the moment she stepped through the door, as if the world outside had loosened its grip, and she found herself walking slowly between tall shelves filled with stories that had lived longer than most people she knew, her coat still on, her hands slightly cold, her mind tired from a week of deadlines and unanswered emails, and she told herself she would just browse for 10 minutes. Maybe find something light to read, something that did not ask too much of her heart, because lately her heart felt like something fragile she carried without protection, and as she moved deeper into the store she noticed how calm everything felt, how no one hurried her, how the soft music blended with the quiet turning of pages, and she relaxed enough to forget herself, which was exactly when the moment happened, because she reached for a book placed just out of reach, a novel she had been meaning to read for months, and she stretched her arm higher, standing on her toes, feeling slightly foolish for not asking for help, and just as her fingers brushed the spine the book slipped, falling hard to the wooden floor with a sharp sound that broke the calm like glass, and suddenly the silence felt heavy, and Emma froze, her face warming instantly, her first thought not about the book but about the eyes she knew must be on her now, and she hated that feeling, hated how easily embarrassment found her, how quickly it settled in her chest, and she bent down at the same moment someone else did, their hands nearly touching before he picked up the book instead, and she straightened too fast, her hair falling into her face, her heart beating louder than it should, and when she looked up she saw him, a man she had not noticed before, standing close but not too close, holding the book as if it mattered, and he smiled in a way that was not amused or impatient but warm and easy, like this moment was not something to rush through, and he spoke gently, making a small comment about the book wanting attention, and his voice surprised her, steady and calm, and for a second Emma forgot what she was embarrassed about, because she felt something else, something unfamiliar and uncomfortable, the feeling of being truly seen without judgment, and she took the book from his hands, their fingers brushing for half a second, and she told herself it meant nothing, that it was just a small accident, a stranger being polite, yet her face stayed warm, not from shame now but from awareness, and she thanked him too quickly, already preparing to step away, but he didn't leave. He asked if she had read anything by that author before, and the question caught her off guard because it was simple and sincere, not the kind people ask just to fill silence, and she answered honestly, admitting she had not but had heard good things, and he nodded as if that mattered, as if her answer carried weight, and he introduced himself as Daniel, his name landing softly between them, and she told him hers, wondering why this small exchange felt larger than it should, and they talked for a few minutes about books and quiet places and how this store felt like a pause from real life, and Emma became aware of how easily the words came, how she was not rushing to escape, how the embarrassment she expected to swallow her had instead shifted into something warmer, something curious. And she did not understand that feeling enough to trust it, which made her nervous, because she had learned to be careful with things she could not name, and when the conversation ended and they went their separate ways, Emma walked through the store in a light daze, replaying the moment again and again, the sound of the book hitting the floor, the way Daniel had smiled, the calm in his voice, and she felt foolish for thinking about it so much, for letting such a small moment linger, yet she could not shake the sense that something had changed, not in the world, but in her, like a door had opened slightly without her permission, and when she finally left the bookstore, the cold air hitting her face, she paused on the sidewalk, holding the book against her chest, and she realized the embarrassment she felt at first had not faded the way it usually did, it had transformed, settling into a quiet awareness that followed her all the way home, and she did not know yet whether she liked that feeling or feared it, only that it stayed, and that staying was what unsettled her the most. Emma told herself that the moment in the bookstore was nothing more than a passing interaction, the kind that happens every day and disappears just as quickly, yet days later she still felt it following her like a quiet echo, showing up when she least expected it, while she worked late at night, while she waited for coffee to brew, while she walked past the harbor wrapped in her coat, and she tried to ignore it by focusing on routine, on deadlines, on the safety of familiar habits, but the feeling refused to leave, and what surprised her most was how gently it stayed, never demanding attention, only reminding her that something had shifted, and then she saw him again, standing near the same bookstore window as if he had always belonged there, and this time she noticed him before he noticed her, noticed how calm he looked, how he seemed unhurried in a world that rushed everything, and when their eyes met, his smile came easily, without surprise, as if meeting again made sense, and they talked briefly, not about the bookstore moment, but about ordinary things, about the weather turning colder, about how the town felt quieter this time of year, and Emma found herself laughing more than she meant to, feeling lighter than she had in weeks, and when they parted again she expected the feeling to fade, but instead it grew clearer, and over the next few weeks their paths crossed naturally, never forced, sometimes for only a minute, sometimes longer, once at a cafe where Daniel asked if he could join her. And she hesitated only a second before saying yes, and they sat across from each other, cups between them, the world moving outside the window while time inside felt slower, and Emma realized she felt comfortable in a way she had not felt with anyone new in a long time. Because Daniel did not push for more than she offered, he listened, he remembered small things she mentioned, and he spoke honestly about his own life, about teaching, about his quiet routines, about how he liked places that allowed people to pause, and Emma noticed how her embarrassment still surfaced now and then, how she sometimes stumbled over words or felt too aware of herself. Yet Daniel never made her feel wrong for it, and slowly, without planning it, she began to look forward to seeing him, began to notice the spaces he left behind when he wasn't there, and that realization unsettled her, because she had built her life carefully after her last heartbreak, keeping feelings controlled and expectations low, believing that distance was safety, and now here she was, feeling drawn toward someone she barely knew, and she didn't like how easily that happened, didn't like how vulnerable it made her feel, yet she couldn't deny the warmth that came with it, the way her days felt fuller, and one evening as they walked along the harbor, the sky darkening, lights reflecting on the water, Daniel asked her why she seemed so guarded sometimes, not accusing, just curious, and Emma stopped walking, surprised by the honesty of the question, and she almost brushed it off, but something about the quiet moment made her answer truthfully, and she told him she had learned to protect herself, that caring deeply had once cost her more than she expected, and Daniel didn't interrupt or try to fix it. He only nodded and said he understood more than she knew, and that simple response stayed with her long after they said goodbye, because it made her realize that what scared her most was not Daniel, but the fact that she liked how she felt around him, liked the way embarrassment no longer felt like weakness, liked how being seen did not feel dangerous, and as days passed, Emma became aware that the feeling she tried to dismiss had turned into something steady, something that didn't rush her but didn't leave either, and one night as she sat alone, lights low, she admitted to herself what she had been avoiding, that she cared, that she was curious, that she was opening a door she had kept closed for a long time, and instead of fear, she felt a quiet acceptance, a sense that maybe this feeling, this slow connection, was not something to fight, and maybe, just maybe, it was something she was ready to let stay. Emma did not plan to say yes when Daniel invited her to spend an evening with a few of his friends, because the idea alone made her chest tighten, not because she disliked people, but because she feared the version of herself that appeared around them, the quiet pauses, the overthinking, the sudden rush of embarrassment that arrived without warning, and she almost sent a polite message to cancel, yet something stopped her, a small voice reminding her that she had already stepped further than she ever thought she would, and backing away now would feel like denying something honest, so she went, arriving early, her hands cold despite the warm room, and the moment she stepped inside she felt exposed, aware of where to stand, how to smile, how to speak without sounding unsure, and Daniel noticed immediately, greeting her with the same calm presence that had drawn her in from the start, introducing her without pressure, staying near without holding on, letting her choose her space, and Emma tried to relax, listening more than she spoke, watching how easily he moved among people, how he included her without forcing attention, yet inside she battled her thoughts, worrying she looked awkward, worrying she did not belong, worrying that her quiet nature would feel like a flaw, and at one point she excused herself to step outside for air, the night cool against her face, the noise behind the door fading, and she wondered why this mattered so much to her, why she cared about his world, about how she fit into it, when she had spent so long convincing herself she did not need to fit anywhere. And Daniel joined her a moment later, not asking why she left, only standing beside her, and the silence between them felt safe enough for honesty, and she surprised herself by speaking, admitting that she often felt embarrassed around people, that she feared being misunderstood, that sometimes she wished she could disappear into the background, and Daniel listened with full attention, his expression steady, and when she finished he said something simple that shifted everything, telling her that he had noticed her quiet moments, not as weakness but as care, as thoughtfulness, as someone who felt deeply before speaking, and Emma felt something open in her chest at those words, because she had spent years believing that her sensitivity was something to fix, something to hide, and here was someone seeing it differently, and that realization stayed with her even after the evening ended, even after they said goodbye, because it made her question the story she had been telling herself for so long, and in the days that followed she became more aware of her emotions, noticing how often she held back, how quickly she judged herself, and how much energy she spent protecting old wounds, and as she and Daniel continued to see each other, walking, talking, sharing quiet moments, Emma felt a growing tension inside her, not between them, but within herself, between the comfort of staying guarded and the risk of being fully open. And one evening as they sat together watching the city lights reflect on the water, Daniel spoke about his past, about a relationship that had ended not with anger but with distance, about how he learned that silence could hurt just as much as words, and Emma felt the weight of his honesty, understanding that he too carried lessons, that he too had chosen to try again despite knowing the cost, and in that moment she felt exposed in a way that scared her, because she realized she was not just enjoying his presence, she was allowing herself to hope, and hope had once broken her, and she struggled with that truth, pulling back slightly, choosing silence where she wanted to speak, and Daniel noticed, not pressing her, but the space between them grew heavier, and Emma felt the risk of losing what they were building simply because she was afraid to step forward. And one night, alone in her apartment, she faced herself honestly, admitting that her embarrassment was not about others, but about fear, fear of being fully known, fear of giving someone the power to hurt her again, and with that realization came a quiet resolve, because she understood that protecting herself had kept her safe, but it had also kept her lonely, and the connection she felt with Daniel was not something dramatic or overwhelming, it was steady and real, and that made it worth the risk. And the next time they met, Emma did something small but brave. She spoke without overthinking, she shared a thought she would normally keep inside, and when Daniel smiled, not surprised but appreciative, she felt a shift, a soft release, and she knew that this was the turning point, the moment where she stopped fighting her nature and started trusting it, realizing that what she once tried to hide was the very thing that allowed her to connect. And as she walked home that night, the city quiet around her, Emma felt nervous but grounded, aware that the path ahead was uncertain, yet for the first time in a long while, uncertainty did not feel like something to fear, it felt like something alive. Autumn arrived gently, changing the town without asking permission, and Emma felt the same quiet shift happening inside her as days passed and her connection with Daniel settled into something steady and real, not rushed, not dramatic, but meaningful in ways she had once thought were only possible in stories, and they began spending more time together, walking through streets lined with falling leaves, sharing meals that felt less like dates and more like moments of belonging, and Emma noticed how her embarrassment still appeared at times, in small pauses, in moments when she felt too open, but it no longer controlled her, because Daniel never made her feel small for it, never rushed her words, never filled silences that felt important, and slowly she realized she was no longer bracing herself around him, no longer preparing for disappointment. And one afternoon they returned to the same bookstore where everything had started, the memory of that first moment still clear, and Emma stood beneath the familiar shelf, looking up at the books, smiling at herself, aware of how much had changed since then, and when she reached for a book and stopped, choosing instead to ask Daniel for help, she felt something settle inside her, a quiet acceptance of who she was, and as he handed her the book, their hands touching briefly, she did not pull away, did not overthink the warmth that spread through her, because it felt natural, and as they walked through the store together, Emma reflected on how long she had believed embarrassment meant weakness, how she had hidden parts of herself to appear stronger, calmer, easier to accept, and now she understood that those very parts were what allowed her to connect deeply, to care fully, to love honestly, and later that evening, sitting by the harbor as the sky darkened and the lights reflected on the water, Daniel spoke about the future, not with promises or pressure, but with openness, saying he liked where things were going, that he valued what they were building, and Emma felt a familiar flutter of fear, but it no longer stopped her, because she had learned that fear did not always mean danger, sometimes it meant growth, and she answered him truthfully, saying she felt the same, her voice steady despite the weight of the words, and in that moment she realized she was no longer embarrassed by her feelings, no longer trying to control them, because liking someone did not make her weak, it made her alive, and as weeks passed, their bond deepened quietly, through shared routines, through moments of laughter and reflection, through small disagreements handled with care, and Emma found herself standing more confidently in her own life, speaking more freely, trusting her instincts, And she understood that what once felt like a flaw was actually her strength, her ability to feel deeply, to be affected, to open herself despite risk. And one evening, as they walked home under a sky full of stars, Emma smiled to herself, realizing that the embarrassment she once feared had led her to something honest and meaningful, something worth protecting, and she no longer wished that moment away, because without it, she might have stayed closed, guarded, and alone. And now, walking beside someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway, she felt calm, grounded, and hopeful, knowing that she had not changed who she was to find love, she had simply accepted herself, and that acceptance made all the difference.